Namaste everybody and happy Deepavali to all. It's a nice way to celebrate Diwali, a different way to celebrate Diwali, I guess. So, welcome to everyone. Thank you to IPSMF for organizing this. Thank you, Anya, for your lecture. So, we have this rather high-powered panel here, and let's see if we can have some fun. Okay, I hope to make this interactive. We'll give you some time to ask sharp questions later. We have about 45 minutes and too many people, so I won't take too much of the time. But you people are used to asking other people questions, right? So this is going to be fun because you have to now answer. So you know how it's to be on the other side. And I'm just going to start break the ice by asking all of you. As Anya has said, as the IPSMF presentation said, it's a really tough time for journalism. So why don't each of you very briefly tell me, what on earth are you doing in this profession still? Yeah? Go ahead, Seema.
Is it on?
It's working, go ahead.
Is it on? Yeah. What on earth are we doing here, or am I doing here? So, still doing the very old school magazine journalism, that had disappeared for a good period of time in India. What is different with us is that we found a business model, and I could sort of connect with her last slide, and top 3 points are exactly what we are doing. We found our audience, we found our niche, and we are not that ambitious. We are doing just one story a day.
Good, thank you. Please.
Hello, yeah. I've been a mainstream journalist for nearly 40 years.
Yes.
But I decided it was time to get out of it because talking truth to power is not only about talking and questioning government, but there is an establishment, there is a media establishment, there is a judicial establishment, and there is a law and order establishment. All those things need to be questioned. So part of our job, the way we see it in Swarajya, is talking truth to mainstream media that does not talk about large areas that we think are important to the truth. So the media has become a part of the establishment in many ways. So we think we need to talk other aspects of it, and that's what we do. We are largely into commentary journalism, but we have now started reporting a lot. IPSMF has helped do some of those kind of reporting. So that's where we are gradually getting into more ground-based reporting, where we started originally with more commentary to fill up gaps that we saw in the mainstream media.
So India Spend was started with the objective of using data to tell stories in public interest, focusing on issues like and around health, education, environment, and gender. These are foundational issues, and there is very little written about most of these issues, given a country of our size, given the depth of challenges we face, particularly in areas like health. So when we define our challenges and ask ourselves why we are doing this, we're doing this because most of these issues are uncovered or undercovered or not at all covered. And someone needs to do it. And that really is what drives us. There is some business model, and obviously that's why I'm still sitting here. But it's also important for organizations like, it's important that organizations like IPSMF have given us the seed and the encouragement to land where we are. And it is really up to us to build from here on, even in a relatively more challenging environment.
I've been a mainstream journalist for a long time, and I'm still trying to be a mainstream journalist on a different platform. We also believe that there is no contradiction between good journalism and the marketplace. And once you build the brand, the market finds a way of paying you for it. So we built some brand, and market's paying some for it, but I think there is some distance to go. Our mission statement, I can't say it formally, or I can't use it in writing, is to be the Bloomberg of politics and governance in India, which means if you want to know about business and economy, you go to Bloomberg. So, sorry, Nayan, and Business Standard. But if you want to know about politics and government in India, you come to the print. And that's why maybe we are overambitious in certain areas. We want to expand. IPSMF has helped us expand in areas which currently would not have featured on our priorities. Areas like science, our Hindi section, our coverage of the Northeast, tribal areas. Many of those areas we would have postponed for a few years, but I think we are growing there and I think we are doing all right. We have a good team coming up.
I'm here because it's a very exciting time to be a journalist. I was looking at Anya's checklist of what many of these startups had in common, and I think we check all those boxes, except that I regard myself and all of us who started The Wire not as people who were forced out of mainstream, but as people who have defected from mainstream media or defected from big media. And quite frankly, the reason we started The Wire was because of our collective distaste and disenchantment with what big media had become in India. And we saw a very clear link between the decline in editorial standards and change in editorial priorities and the dominant business model that, that drives these media organizations. And we felt that breaking new ground editorially might also mean working out a new compact between reader and journalist via a new business model, which of course depends, at least in the initial phases, on philanthropic support, but our long-term vision and a vision where we are at least halfway there is to be funded by readers. So I think in terms of crowdfunding, in terms of reader support, that's where we see our future. And the more we do the work that we've set out to do, I think the greater is the public willingness to actually give money for this cause.
So though these are people who have been in journalism for such a long time, each one now has a new organization that they are setting up, innovating actually away from the old forms of media. So, but what you said, Siddharth, is a good segue into just going straight into the question of the business models, okay? That you all are all experimenting with new business models. You just talked about the reader pays kind of model, 50% you want to edge up to. How sustainable do you think any of this is, unless you go back to what Anya said, that we'll have to think really big and you'll have to have big philanthropy or big government spending to keep the media sector alive. So anybody can chip in. It doesn't have to be one after the other. So just, Jagannath, do you want to go first?
See, I think the reader pay model works reasonably well for us because we focused on certain areas where there's a lot of reader support. I mean, one of the points that Anya mentioned, that if you are focused on the community you serve, then there's a greater chance of financial support in that. So looking at our experience over the last 2 years, especially in Swarajya, we find that probably about 50 to 70% of costs can be taken care of by reader-related revenues. It's the other 30-40% which is important for us to break even, that stuff, which is what probably needs to be donor funded, or because thanks to all your tech rogues, your Googles and the Facebooks, basically they've eaten our lunch on the advertising side. So there is no way we can sustain ourselves with much advertising. We do get a little bit, but that also comes from the community that we serve. So if there are people who in the community who are with companies who believe in what we do, they do give us advertising, but it's more like donor in a sense. It's not advertising based on readership.
Right. Anybody else? I mean, all of you need to talk about a business model because that's probably the most important thing to figure out the future sustainability, right?
So
yes. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Seema, go ahead.
So, yeah, our business model, like from day one, was subscription, the day we launched.
Yes.
And that was like 3 years ago, and people said, who's going to pay for online stuff? It's free
and just
and
one
all
story
that.
a day.
Yeah, so we became we did quite well in the first week itself, so that was very encouraging. And then we got the grant, so that was a good cushion and all. But we've sort of found a virtuous cycle that subscription is like business model, which gives us independence to do what we want. And we are sort of muckrakers in some way, but we don't want to be seen as like, initially when we started, people said, you guys are tehelka of business journalism. That stung because we are not. We are not anti-business. It's just that we raise questions which mainstream media should be
Businessmen in the
asking.
audience, please note. Yeah.
So, yeah, questions which, a few good questions which every business journalist should ask in mainstream media, they're not doing that. So it's like our work starts where their work ends. So, and people saw merit in that, and we've been borderline profitable for the last 1 year, and we are growing month on month, we are growing 100% year on year. So it's clearly proven that if you identify your niche, if you serve a certain audience, you know what your audience is, unlike the earlier era of, view from nowhere, writing for some anonymous reader. It's not like that. You have to understand who your audience is, engage with them. And I think engaging with the audience is also like a big check on us because, a whole lot of my team members are here. They'll tell you that we get screenshots from people if we get something wrong. As simple as grammar. Right? So it's that level of engagement with the reader. So that's helping and we are growing. So, but some bit of, like patronage, we have patrons who sort of help us take our journalism to, say, students and, say, NGOs and all that. So we found different ways of making our work more sort of, widespread.
But would you say by limiting yourself to this subscription, does it prevent you from doing better stories that you would have wanted to do, more investigative reporting?
In fact, it gives us more time and money to do that. Our every story takes about 15 days on average. Even a regular everyday, which is not like a massive bringing down a government or a company. Every story takes that. Which mainstream publication would allow that kind of time today to a journalist that spent 10, 12 days writing a first draft? So I think it's this model which allows us to do that.
Thank you. Govind?
So we are actually, unlike most other media organizations, a more B2B product. So, and also we have elements of a think tank. So if you see our work, for instance, we perhaps enjoy the highest number of citations for any media organization. Citations as original citations. I mean, because we are not intern quoting from other media organizations. So in a good quarter, we do almost 35, 40 high quality citations from universities all over the world, academia, PhDs, and so on. So our business model has obviously, I mean, the critical part and the seed part has been IPSMF, for which we're very thankful and grateful. But we've also seen that there is a market for contract research. I mean, if you look at even the most irreverent end of media, which is, let's say, stand-up comedy. We've worked with All India Bakchot, for instance, for 2 of their series and on to the 3rd one till they got hit by a Me Too allegation and then they ran into problems. But apart from that, we are now talking to, for instance, a bunch of stand-up comics who want to launch a sort of Netflix-grade production on fact-checking, for which we are pretty much writing the entire script except for the humor. So, and that's just another example. So we see a lot of opportunity in the B2B space, even on the revenue side, even as we continue to earn somewhat from the people who publish our articles. So, of course, over time, that contribution has reduced slightly. There are only some organizations and newspapers who continue to pay us, and well. But we feel that we are making up for it elsewhere, and we see that as a big opportunity.
We'll come back to the fact-checker part a little later in the conversation. Shekhar, you alluded to it in your introductory remark, but just go a bit deeper into the business model and the sustainability part.
Well, in India right now, there is only one truly sustainable and successful and robust business model in news media. That is the broadsheet newspaper.
Right.
Everything else is broken. TV news in English is completely broken.
Yes.
In Hindi, etc., if you see snakes marrying trees and all, then it can work. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You can see the difference between, say, NDTV India and any of the commercially successful news channel. All news models are broken. So there is nothing to learn from there. I think in terms of setting up business models, we have to learn from the dailies. The dailies over time built their own niches, both for readership, quality of readership, and also the kind of advertising and revenues they go out and get. Broadsheets in India are run on very little subscription revenue because prices are very low. And advertising has begun to change now. So we also struggle and we also get frustrated because Google and Facebook take so much of our money away.
Lion's share, yeah.
So much of
all
our
of
money
it
away, but we are very new. We are just exactly 2 years old. I think we are getting to a stage when we are building reader loyalty because we are fully mainstream and we want to expand and grow, and we are growing, but we want to expand a lot more. And we are building trust for accuracy as well as lack of bias. So we are also very carefully dehyphenated because that is one niche that's available, and that's a niche that lends itself to growth and expansion. That brings a disadvantage because that does not necessarily create audiences who are willing to pay for you. Because audiences will pay for you because if you see, because they see you as a cause. But we do believe that that even the commercial models will change. Facebook is under pressure. Google is being asked questions, and now things for which we give away money to say Google, it is possible to go out directly to advertisers and tell them, look, why are you wasting all this money taking a 25 lakh ad on the front page of the Times of India? We can reach you the same audiences at a very tiny fraction of the price. So I think the future of digital news media lies in digital news media becoming like a targeted drug for the advertiser. That you don't want to reach millions and billions of people if you're selling a particular product or an idea. Maybe Parle biscuits will need to, but not everybody. So we can get you that reach to people who will trust what they are seeing generally in a good environment and at maybe less than 1% of the cost. So I think that is the future, and we are finding some little success in those areas. But really, we are in the brand building phase right now.
Thank you. Siddharth, you also mentioned something, but tell me about the sustainability. Is there going to be subscription fatigue? Are readers going to say, how many things am I going to pay for? How much can I read? In that sense, the general interest newspaper, you look at it once, you get a bit of this, bit of that, and you're done for the day. And this, you have to keep. I have to go to India's Print, I have to go to Can, I have to go to print. Okay, all of you. I didn't want to leave anyone out. But is there going to be fatigue? Is there already fatigue?
See, it depends on what the reader is being asked to do. Readers, I'm not convinced, in the Indian context, will leap at becoming paid subscribers in a paywall kind of scenario. Full marks to Business Standard. Ken, of course, is an early pioneer, but the Business Standard and now the Hindu, which are experimenting, and perhaps BS and Hindu have the kind of brand loyalty that they can pull it off. But, as Shekhar said, newspapers themselves cost next to nothing, so readers are not in the habit of even paying for a print product. Yes. That said, I think readers will pay if they see value in the form of not necessarily, quote-unquote value for money, but a media organization that represents the kind of values that they believe in or subscribe to. And this is where I think the larger question of the media environment in which we are becomes a factor. For us, this is an opportunity. The fact that big media has tended to duck, important questions. You can have the son of the Home Minister becoming Secretary of the Board of Cricket in India without any major newspaper writing editorials calling out the father for having railed against dynasticism all these years. No angry TV debates happen. So when we write about it, people notice. Sadly, it's not just the reader who notices, but governments also notice. And governments then find ways to stop this from happening. So when we say that we need to depend on the reader, this is really a function of necessity. Because to be brutally honest, we are in an environment where, just to give you an anecdote, a well-known artist who really ought to have nothing to fear in life, told us recently that he wants to donate. He heard that The Wire is doing a fundraising campaign, and he wanted to donate a painting. But he said, you have to find some way that my name doesn't come out, that I have given this donation. I said, look, what are you worried about? And he said, no, I'd rather if it was done in some other way. So this is the reality, right? And so our ability to reach out to, say, US style, like high net worth individuals or companies that in a normal environment would be quite happy. Or even companies to advertise. Like right now we are in the business of reaching out to sponsors for, we're doing some television shows on, kind of digital TV on YouTube. These are very high viewership shows. And so we're knocking on the doors of companies to say, look, you prepare to sponsor this, etc. This is still a work in progress. I'm hoping that we will get some. But some early indications that I'm getting is that there is that fear factor continues to operate. And I think this is what, and my fear is that the future kind of, like already we've seen for the first time the government introducing regulations on FDI in digital media, right? Until 6 weeks ago, there was no rule.
26%?
Yeah, exactly. And this was presented as a great reform.
Great reform, yes.
Earlier there was no cap, but even if you have a cap, the deadliest bit is that approval will be on a case-by-case basis.
That's right.
So if you are government-friendly media and you want an FDI, digital media, and you want an FDI partner, chances are that your approval will come through. If you're not, then,
Good. I was going to rely on you to get this next question on press freedom going, so thank you. One of Napoleon Bonaparte, I like what he said, that 4 hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. So as you train your bayonets, see, as the national interest and the public, the government's interest and the national and public interest can diverge, okay? And obviously governments don't want people, all governments, some governments more so than others. So how do you, Anya, I'll come to you too, I'll give you a chance too, but you can just pip in whenever you want to. So how do you make that separation in the work that you could do? He gave one example. Can all of you come give us examples about how you are able to separate those two interests, the public interest and the ruling government's interests? How do you do that? Can you give an example of some story? How do you balance it? There's a fear factor into 2019. How do you do that, all of you, any of you?
So, India spent, so most of our stories are foundational, as in, if we're attacking a problem of tuberculosis and the fact that, let's say, we are lagging behind our own targets of fixing tuberculosis or reducing the incidence, or the fact that it can take 6 months and 2,000 kilometers of travel before someone finds a cure for cancer, or lands up at Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai. And that's a story series for which we won the World Oncological Reporting Award last year. So things like that are not necessarily against the government, but they're definitely attacking the system all the time. And we do a lot of that. Now that's one part. The other part is, let's say, stuff which is when we do stories under factchecker.in, which upsets a lot of people. It upsets Jaggi, for instance, a lot. And we do that because we see data gaps. And we have 2 ways of approaching data gaps. One is to say, okay, can we go to source data and try and find something? If the source data is missing, like we've got an NCRB report out right now, which clearly is not focusing on some aspects of crime, which they should have been. And by not doing it, you're actually,
I think the audience knows. Are we talking about hate crimes?
Yeah, hate crime.
Yeah,
no,
right.
There are a couple of types of crime which they have not covered, and hate crime, and in turn, or rather, instead you have suicides, and instead you have an anti-national as a section of crime. So anyway, so my thing is, what is the solution to this? So either we can use technology, which we've done, let's say, when we've tried to address data gaps in air quality, or we can try and find alternate sources of that of that data point or of information. And I feel that as we do that, people have to understand that we are here to try and fix that gap, and we will in that process either make mistakes, make some people happy, make some people upset, and that's part of life. So and yes, this environment is not the most friendly environment, but in a way I think this is. I mean, look at it this way. If it was the happiest environment, then many of us wouldn't exist, right? If everyone liked what all the journalism that all the mainstream media was doing, then why would they come to us? And I think it's, in a way, it's our sort of reverse business model that we exist and people consume us because others are not doing their job or not doing their job efficiently. So in a way, to me, this is a good thing. And the last point is that, see, somewhere I think, I mean, obviously the playbook has changed in the last few years. I feel, and this is a confession of sorts, I think people like me, for instance, have been a little late in responding to this. I think we somewhere assumed that, oh, this is democracy, this is what we are used to, this is the freedom of press, and this will continue. And this has changed, and it's not changed just in India, as Anya pointed out, it's changed in many countries. So I think we should have, in some ways, caught on a little faster and responded a little, not responded, I think response is a continuous thing, but I think understood and internalized it a little faster. I think today I'm far more internalized to it, and therefore now thinking of solutions rather than treating it as a problem.
But do you think that you need to be sort of more on what, any of you can answer this, that I was reading Paul Graham. He says you have to pick a side to get people to read or to subscribe. You can't just write both sides. You can't be on both sides, what we used to call in those good old days, neutral journalism, that you have to pick a side. And that's how you get your audience. Any comments? Actually, Jaggi, you want to, Jaggi, you want to talk on that?
No, I just have one small point
Sorry.
on this, is that we exist because we have a point of view, and we don't like neutered kind of a thing he said, and she said.
That seems to be over, right? That kind of journalism almost.
Yeah, but most of the newspaper journalism today is also like that, right? I mean, at least because we don't write on politics, we cover policy in our sphere of work. And there, there also we take a stance.
Sure.
In regular business stories, we take a stance. But people have, from the government, in quasi-government bodies, they've come to me and said that, while I don't agree with your points, but I will say that you don't write loosely. All your, opinions and viewpoints are backed by facts. So I guess people are looking for that they want to know where you stand. You're not on the fence.
Want to know where you stand.
So
yeah.
That's
Jackie, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, the point about picking a side, I think, is important. What we do is, when we pick different sides and different angles, when you read all of them, you will get some closer approximation of the truth. Because we all have human biases, we have limitations in terms of what we do and things like that. And we have no quarrel with him. We only fact-check some fact-checking also. And that's where the dispute comes. So we don't believe that they are the gold standard in fact-checking. We think we have pointed out where you made your errors. So, and I think some of them have been graciously acknowledged, so it's fine. So we have no quarrel with it. He should do it. He should fact-check us. We'll fact-check him. So that's the way it is. I think it is through this adversarial position that you actually come to the truth. Because once everybody agrees that, oh, we are all nicely neutral, it's never going to happen. Okay, so I think it's important because we think there is a gap in the way the world understands India and in the way we need to understand ourselves, and we are trying to fill that gap.
But do you think, Anya, that what the media is doing on this is furthering the polarization that we are seeing in so many countries?
By taking a position?
Yeah, because they take, and then you have to keep on, sort of, perhaps going further and further, either to the right or to the left, or
yeah. So I think the
up or down.
problem,
Yeah.
sorry to sound like an academic, but I think the problem is we don't actually know that much about causality. So there's new research suggesting that exposure to Fox television does actually cause people to vote Republican, and areas that have more exposure to Fox, the governments are doing less spending now than they were. So, so there does seem to be causality, over long periods of time. But I think it's journalists are really in a very difficult position at this point. So the other thing I think is that journalists always think everything's their fault, and that if they just change their practice, they could fix the problems of the world. So that report that you mentioned before
Yes.
about media trust, I also surveyed all these organizations around the world that are trying to build media trust, and they're going out into the communities, and they're engaging with audiences, and they're being very transparent about who they are and what their processes are. And I think that's really important for journalists to do. And yes, probably there was complacency, but we don't know. That's hard to scale, and that's expensive, and I'm not sure. I think there's a global problem right now of distrust and polarization. So I think, there is some evidence that things like native advertising and the movement to the internet confused audiences, for sure, but I'm not sure that the opposite of that, how much that is going to do at this point. Having said that, sorry, I really do sound like an academic. There is that sort of counter-speech argument that if we can just keep up with good quality, reliable information, audiences will learn to seek it out. And I think in this world now, because there's so many entrants and there's so many options, everything you're saying is true, actually.
Yeah.
So yes, for some of you, advocating and taking a position will generate revenue and support, and for others of you, staying sort of neutral and he said, she said, and balanced will generate support. I don't know that there's one thing that's going to fix the mess we're in right now, in fact.
That's right. But go ahead.
Yeah. No, I wanted to say that, polarization, I'm sure everybody in the audience has an uncle or an aunt, mama or mommy, who has told you at some point that, why can't BJP and Congress come together and form a national government? No, right? So the point is that this is not going to happen. Like, we live in a society which is where people have very definite views of right and wrong. What we want and what we require is that the art of conversation should not be thrown aside, right? And I fear that in Indian politics and increasingly in the Indian media space, we have lost that art of having civilized discussion and debate, right? So we are all too quick to label people, name-calling, shout, literally on television. Yeah. And of course, this is there in politics, this is there across the board. Increasingly, we see this on campuses. And I think that in our own way, what all of us on this platform are trying to do is that we perhaps bring different points of view, different areas of emphasis, but we try to do what we do without shouting, certainly without name-calling, without getting into, without lowering the level of public discussion. I think that's very essential.
It's kind of easier to do that on television anyway. So, but tell me, if I were to say, do you think trust in the media, in India at least, is growing or dipping? What would you all say? Growing? How many think out of you?
Depends on where you're looking.
Okay.
If you're looking at social media, it doesn't exist. But the problem is too many of us look at social media.
Right.
So I find, for example, that there are times when on social media you think, if so many people are saying this about me, I must be such a bad guy. But once you get out of the social media, then nobody tells you that.
Yeah.
In fact, my most wonderful experience is many of the people who famously spend half their day if I don't get trolled for 10 minutes, I feel unwanted, right? But many of my most persistent, I don't use the word trolls for them, sort of critics on social media, I keep running into them at airports, at conferences, they pose for selfies. They want selfies. So I said, go ahead, and they say, please don't mind, I write very nasty things about you. It's all right, go ahead. So I don't think,
but that's
at a larger level, trust has not gone. But TV news in India has done the greatest damage to Indian journalism. Because a lot of the people, when they see these channels in the evening, some are Ravan channels. Rama 10 heads, and then one in the middle, the anchor, right? Rama's head in the middle is donkeys, actually. So the people think this is journalism, that you get together some people and fight every evening, and you know who's going to say what. Or people think that journalism is creating fake scandals. I think that's where we are all filling the gaps. I think respectable broadsheet newspapers have generally kept their sanity. Say about 4 or 5 strong newspapers have kept their sanity. And people have bullshit detectors in their heads. So they know what's a joke, what's fun, so they will watch it. But one, they will not trust it. And second, good advertisers will not go there because they don't want to be in that environment. So I think the best corrective for the media is the marketplace. We are going through a tough time, and sometimes when you don't agree with what someone else in the media is doing, and that is getting a lot of praise or getting a lot of traffic or getting a lot of advertising, you say, what the hell, people are stupid, right? But people are not stupid. I think people watch, people understand, people also know where you are coming from. You asked the question on neutrality, nobody is neutral. None of us is neutral. All of us have a strong point of view. But my sort of favorite lecture for God knows how long in the newsroom is, once we journalists accept a basic fact, that news doesn't have to be what we want it to be. News, in fact, often is not what we want it to be. Once you accept that, then journalism is not that difficult. But if you think, oh, this isn't what I wanted it to be, but let me make it like that. Or what can I find? Or it has to be like that. And I've had arguments with a very good reporter who came with a story saying Indian soldiers taken prisoner by the Pakistanis, they were mutilated, bodies were mutilated. And I asked for post-mortem report to see whether they were mutilated or beaten to death. And the reporter said, what is the difference? I said, you have to be clinical. This is journalism. And then I was told, I can't be clinical with the bodies of my country's soldiers. I said, no, then you don't be a journalist. So you have to make those decisions all the time. No, that guy was a BJP politician. He's not a Congress politician. He's Manvendra Singh.
It's the other way around nowadays.
Manvendra Singh.
But yeah.
So he left us, and next day he was an officer in the territorial army. Next day he got himself in uniform and joined the psychological warfare cell in the army headquarters. That is where he should have been, not in the newsroom.
Place, right.
So we make this. You have to make these calls all the time. We, for example, broke the story on the helicopter being brought on by fratricide. But in our commentary, in our writing, there was never any sense of schadenfreude or say, Modi government serves you right. These are your country's soldiers. This kind of stuff happens in operational situations. Every armed forces, all armed forces have friendly fire casualties. At the same time, we did not see a scandal in Rafale. So while for doing the first story, we got abuse from this side saying, why did you have to do this? Now that you've done it, everybody is doing it. But on the other, we got questioned by all the rest of them saying that so many of the others are saying Rafale is a big scandal. But I said, show me something. Show me the money. Show me a trail of something. I agree that buying 36 was too low. We should have bought more. But I don't see a scandal. If I don't see a scandal, I can't just say that because a lot of people believe that there is a scandal, and because scandals are fashionable, a Rafale scandal is right now fashionable, and anything on Rafale will go viral, I will not run those stories, whatever the cost. So those are calls you have to take, and I don't think digital is in any way different from any other platform, as long as you want to stay in the classical, old-fashioned definition of news.
But speaking of, you didn't see a scandal, but let me, any of you can answer. At what point will you not carry a story even though you have the evidence?
Can I just add to that last point, and just one point, then I can pass on. So I think that question that you put about trust is generational. I think if you put that question to younger people, you'll get a very different answer.
Right,
I think we're all above a certain age, and we obviously are biased. But I think a lot of young people do not trust media, and do not trust media in this country as they don't trust it in many other countries as well. So, and I think that's something that we have to recognize and understand and accept, even as we try and find solutions.
Let's do a quick unscientific audience poll. How many of you really trust the media? You can lift your hands if you do. We are not going to identify you, so don't put on the lights. Nobody will do it. Put the lights off. Okay, how many of you really trust the media? Well, okay, the media you choose to read, clearly. You read it because you trust it, I suppose. But yeah, no, I'm trying to see if there's an age divide here, whether the young people are indeed putting their hands down. But Since we have put off the lights, I can't really tell. But there are enough hands up to be able to stay in your...
There are enough hands which are not up. I think that's
Look, I think that there is no getting away from the fact that public trust in India, in the media, is low.
Yes.
And it is lower today than it was in the past. Although, I mean, we all talk about golden age of Indian journalism, not the Ganguly era or the muckraking era, but old-timers often wistfully remember the 70s and 80s.
Yes.
Actually, journalism wasn't all that great, and you have to go back and look at the papers of that time. I think a lot of the work we do today is in the big papers. It's probably better than what they were doing in the 70s and 80s. But the fact is that largely because of television, but also because of some big marquee broadsheet dailies
Yes.
engaging in terrible practices, sharp, corrupt practices, paid news,
Yeah.
and all kinds of other, which is all fairly well documented by now.
Yes, that's right.
Public trust is much lower than what is, and sadly, because public trust is low, this allows a situation to arise where attacks on media freedom, which take a variety of forms, have, I wouldn't say social sanction or public sanction, but the public is kind of not particularly bothered.
That's right.
And I think this is
In
what
fact,
creates
very high number
a
of
fairly
journalists
dangerous...
just in India as well. Yeah.
It creates a dangerous kind of
Increasing.
issue for us. I wanted to respond to your question on evidence and stories. I don't think anybody should do a story without having the evidence to back it up, right? That's 101. When we were first tipped off about the friendly fire from the mother of a helicopter pilot of another unit, but try as we could, we simply couldn't get any kind of corroborating. So we said, okay, fine, this is not a story. I mean, instinctively it made sense. The pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit, but it wasn't a story that I was comfortable running until I could actually back it up with something. And Shekhar, Manupabi, these journalists had the evidence and they did the story, great, and we followed it. But I think that a lot of often, like say with a large complex story like Rafale, right, or with Bofors, I think journalism requires you to pursue and to ask questions and to pursue information that appears anomalous. Like one of the stories that we did, to which I still haven't got, we haven't got a satisfactory answer. It's kind of part of the Rafale story in a way, that Dassault Aviation, which is the manufacturer of Rafale, in all its life as an arms company, has never invested in any venture that is outside its core area of aircraft manufacturing. However, within a year of signing a contract with Anil Ambani for the manufacture of, for the Rafale as the offset partner, it invests in a dud company of the Anil Ambani group, puts in a substantial amount of money, buys a 35% stake, and is not able to give any explanation as to why they've done that. This is a company that had no earnings before, no earnings since. And it's a question worth raising, and particularly when the CEO of Dassault and government ministers go out of their way to insist that, to confuse one Ambani brother for the other, saying that, no, Mukesh Ambani's, Dassault had done a deal with Mukesh earlier, and, if it's Anil now, what does it matter? It's the same company. And you have business journalists interviewing this guy, Trappier, and not stopping him and saying, excuse me, but Anil Ambani has nothing to do with Mukesh Ambani as a corporate entity. So to my mind, there's enough material out there, unanswered questions, which is all, even I wouldn't go as far as to say Rafale scam, right? Yeah. Because there is no evidence to call it a scam. But I think the need for an inquiry, investigation to answer these questions has never been greater, and I'm still hoping that the Supreme Court, when it finally deals with the review petition before Chief Justice, the CJI retires, will respond positively to this demand for an investigation.
Tell me, has it become more difficult to speak truth to power? During the emergency, unfortunately, the Indian media was supposed to have genuflected more than it needed to. Is something similar happening now? Shall we ask the audience to respond? Has it become much more costly? Has the price of speaking truth to power gone up?
My answer is very predictable. Of course, it's a terrible situation right now.
Right.
But what I worry about, and again, I want to connect this to an important point that Dr. Shifrin made in her talk, when she said that investigative journalism is successful when there are public institutions that are able to respond to it.
That's right.
What's happening now is that not only are many media organizations prostrate, but a large number of institutions whose job it is to respond to information that comes in the public domain also do not wish to respond and to discharge their constitutional duty.
Right.
And that's, to my mind, the even bigger worry.
So the media leading without the other institutions backing it actually exposes the media even more, and then the cycle becomes a little vicious. Please go ahead.
Well, I was I was a student during the emergency, so I did not see what happened there. All I can tell you is that every government tries to stop stuff they don't like.
That's
Some are more sophisticated than others. The Congress governments were very sophisticated about this post-emergency. Other governments are quite crude or ham-handed or more direct about this. The other thing that's happened is that, and this now you see in this new universe ruled by alpha males of the right. So there is Trump, Putin, Abe, Xi Jinping,
Erdogan,
Modi, Erdogan, Netanyahu,
So many.
Bolsonaro,
Yeah.
Orban,
Bolsonaro.
Boris Johnson, all of them.
Yeah.
They've all figured that the biggest pressure that you can put on journalists is to deny them access.
That's right.
That is something that film stars had figured first, then cricket stars figured that if you write a line against me, I'll never speak with you, right? And that is something that politicians learn. This government, for example, this government doesn't particularly like sharing much with journalists. In fact, if you ask them, they tell you that we haven't come here to run your media organizations. आप अपना media चलाइए, हम अपना सरकार चला रहे हैं. So there has been a fairly systematic clampdown, and it's quite secular in terms of, it's not to say that such and such organization get it, such and such cannot get it. So many sources which would be available, many civil servants who would usually answer your phone calls, meet you in their offices, that is now going away.
Right.
Right to information is now very diluted. It's going to be diluted
Even
further.
Yeah.
So those are the big problems, and those are problems. To say that there is no problem is wrong. So I don't know how bad things were in the emergency. Sometimes I think that people did fight in the emergency as well, and we self-flagellate too easily. Also in the emergency, the government just came and shut down your press or cut off your electricity supply.
Yeah.
You could not import newsprint on your own.
Newsprint,
The
yes,
government
even-
just took away your newsprint import licenses. So government's powers were a lot
Over the
more.
press is very-
I think today, that's the reason every government today wants some new laws to quote unquote regulate the digital media, because they think this is a wild animal and they are not able to control it.
You want
I
to
just
say?
want a quick point on speaking truth to power. I can speak of business that it's very easy because they don't respond. So when we take up a story, it's a given that the company will not speak, the CEO will not speak. So you go about doing your investigation, and at the end, like filing a charge sheet, you send a list of questions. Most likely they will not respond unless there's something like really outrageously wrong or off sort of, track, then they respond, otherwise not. So it's sort of, in a way, it's easy for us because they don't speak in any...
I think a lot of them must be feeling like Grace Kelly, that the freedom of the press works in such a way that there is not much freedom from it. So, unfortunately, we don't have too much time, right? Sunil, we have to open it up to the audience. But I did want to end on, I was reading Krishna Kumar and the EPW on the topic of education. But he said, in the chamber of echoes we are in, silence alone can speak. And just yesterday in Kashmir, the newspapers ran blank front pages. In Australia, 2 days ago, the papers ran blank front pages. That's creative. Is that impactful? I don't want too many blank front pages for too long.
There's actually a long history of that. In Brazil, during the dictatorship, they used to put birthday cakes on the front page of the newspapers. Yeah. So I think after a while, I think it's impactful in the beginning, and then people get, unfortunately, used to it, I think. But I think you've raised an important point, which is when we think about censorship and control, it's not just what you make people write, but it's also what you don't allow them to write.
It's a day's protest, not to make it a practice.
Yeah.
Indian papers also during the emergency came out with blank editorials. Indian papers also during the emergency came out with blank editorials. Statesman, The Express.
Yes.
I don't know if the
That's
Hindu
right.
did.
There were several papers that gave blank.
So that's symbolic, and everybody knows what's going on.
Right.
I mean, sadly, in the case of the Kashmir paper, I mean, there's nobody here to.
After.
Yeah, there's
Go ahead.
nobody here to. I mean, there is no reverberation of that in wider civil society, or the courts.
Yes.
And you know, which is the point I was making earlier. I mean, two respected child rights activists last month had moved the Supreme Court to look into reports of children having been illegally detained in Kashmir. And the Chief Justice asked the Jammu Kashmir High Court to submit a report, and the Kashmir Court asked the police, and the police furnished a report. So the police actually furnishes a report which goes to the Supreme Court, where they have a list of children who were detained. But to make the point that these detentions were not illegal, they cite, in the case of at least 90 children, that they were held under Section 107 of the Criminal Procedure Code, where you're kept for a day and then you have to give a bond of good behavior, without realizing that under the Juvenile Justice Act of India and Kashmir, it is illegal to apply Section 107 to underage people.
Yeah.
So you can have the police chief claiming legality of his action by citing a law which disproves it. This goes to the Supreme Court. The court doesn't respond. The media doesn't pick it up. And so these symbolic protests are all very well, but I worry about why people are not responding to this in the way that they should.
You know, readers are also confused. Fact is fiction, fiction is fact. We don't know how to sieve sometimes between them. So perhaps that's one thing I can think of. I do have to open it up, but you have to at least, oh, sorry, Jackie, you wanted to say, please go
just
ahead.
2 lines. I think we tend to give too much importance to media freedom when you're sitting in Delhi, but the real threats to media freedom in India
Yes.
are in the state capitals, where journalists have been killed for as little as filing an RTI application.
Right.
So the number of people who've been killed, journalists and even
That's
ordinary people,
That's right.
because of asking a simple question on what is the true facts from a government, you
Yes.
get killed. So I think we have too much focus on the government in Delhi,
Correct.
when the real threats are actually at this level of the states, and we don't want to question them, because we are either in bed with them, or we are, think that, no, that is a chap I don't like, this guy I like, so I will not talk.
Correct. Before we open it, very quick comments on what, while trying to diffuse all the criticism of Facebook, Mr. Zuckerberg talked about the fifth estate. Is the fifth estate, that's all of us, by the way, is that your main competition now? He says citizen journalists, writers, people can speak more freely on platforms, and he calls that the fifth estate. He just recently said that. So
I think it's a great support, because I think you can speak truth to far more powers, including the media or the Supreme Court. Earlier you can't, here you can't. I mean, our Supreme Court has been making a mess of so many things. And we are afraid of talking, saying that, look, you guys are doing nonsense, but you can't speak it. But for the first time, because you have this fifth estate, the digital media, where there is a reasonable degree of anonymity, you can actually question people who are actually also parts of the power structure.
No, we love the fifth estate. We just want Mr. Zuckerberg to set them free.
set them free. All right, Anya, you can carry that message home. With that, let's just open it for a few questions. I think I'm going to take, because how much time do we have? 10 minutes. Okay. Now we may need the lights on in the house. Please go ahead. Blue shirt, I can't see. Just state your name. Unless you want to be anonymous.
Hi, yes. Thank you for hosting this wonderful panel. My name is Jay, and I'm with the Supreme Court Observer. And I had a small question for the entire panel, but in particular, Mr. Vardarajan. How do we respond to sensationalism? And I want to ask that question in the context of going niche, you know, being a sustainable business and knowing your audience and being very niche. You had mentioned, you know, you said we should sustain the art of conversation. Now, one fear I would have is if you only speak to your audience, then you lose that, and it's hard to combat sensationalism then.
Anybody? Quick jab at that?
No, I don't think having the art of conversation in any way disarms or prevents us from dealing with sensationalism. The way you do that is that, you know, often I think all of us actually, maybe not the Ken, because Ken is a business product, but when we look at horrible, fake, sensational stuff out there, we don't respond to everything, but often we feel the responsibility to actually try to set the record straight by calmly explaining what the truth of the matter is. And I think it is possible. I don't think there's a contradiction. And based on the virality of many of these stories, it's clear to me that the audience is much larger than our regular readership. Like when we do this kind of, or when Fact Checker does something or Alt News does something, which is busting fake news, but in a very calm, very clinical way. Those stories, like Alt News's reach is phenomenal on probably a very low month-on-month readership. But when they do something timely by way of intervention, particularly in addressing communal allegations which are intended to, sensationalism that is intended to inflame communal hatred, and they diffuse that. They do it very, very effectively.
Okay, I'm going to take 3 questions and
I
then
have the mic.
you have
I
the
too
mic.
have them.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Vasanthi Hariprakash, passed with the private FM radio as a show host, and now Pickle Jar, reporting via road trips via podcasts. Question number 1, why is radio or news still not on radio, except Akashvani, and why are we taking it lying down? Second question, why is none of you excited by audio as part of your media innovation? And to Rohini, since you represent IPSMF, does radio, audio not excite investors, like say the NPR in the West?
Let's take a couple more.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. One is, are we moving into an era where when we support the government policies, it is not journalism? And when we don't support government policies, yes, that is journalism. When we question, are journalists not giving due to where it's required? And the second question is, does the future and the success of news media and the independent media depend on the future government and the government authorities?
Maybe there's already 3 questions, so I think you should answer that.
So we do a fact checking. It's on Boom actually, our Boom Live. We do something called the Fact Checker Show, and which is a broadcast which is for its size and scale actually begun doing quite well. Where we interview people and try and basically pick up an issue which is being talked about and try and deal with it as a primer or an explainer, where we are just asking questions and trying to get answers. So that's our little audio contribution. But I think the next set of questions is a little more interesting about whether our survival is really linked to governments.
You're waiting for others to answer. Okay.
Take that question, audio. It is a very interesting, you'll be encouraged to hear that we get a lot of requests that why are our stories not in audio form, because people want to read it while commuting and morning, evening and all that, and we write pretty long, so they want audio version. Second, if you sort of do some search, there's been like a phenomenal resurgence in audio and podcasts and all that, and there is a business model now. People are very excited. There are ready-made platforms like WordPress sort of democratized blogging and writing on the web, so there are now similar sort of platforms for podcasts and audio versions. So you'll see audio sort of going forward. So, and we have a lot of requests from our readers.
Maybe if the whole country got stuck in traffic jams like we Bangaloreans do, there would be much more market for radio.
Can I respond to that question? I think you raised a very good question. And that problem arises more from journalists judging fellow journalists too easily. So if somebody does, for example, find a story that, see, journalists, it's a very competitive profession. So if somebody gets a story that really hurts the government and everybody is talking about it, you will find that most other journalists will, first instinct would be to try and knock that story. Either say that it's wrong, or to say that there must be a motive. Similarly, if you find something good, in fact, we started a series, it has lost its way, and I keep thinking how to put it back on rails, called Ideas That Worked. Now, that is not just praising the government, but there are ideas happening all over the country. But the definition was there should be scale to show that it worked. And I'll give you one example, and that story worked also, CISF. people who pat you down at airports. Now, do you realize that it is the only paramilitary force in the country, the only one, which does not take 1 rupee from the exchequer? It is fully self-financing. Not only does it finance itself, it actually pays some surplus money back to the government. Because all those who use it, like all the airports, factories, Infosys, et cetera, they all pay for their services. So effectively, these are the only people in this country in uniform with modern weapons, with the license to shoot, you can pay for. I mean, not everybody can pay for them. But it's an idea that's worked in the government. Yes, he's paying for it. So, so somebody has to say that you are on threat level, this and this. That's how it happens. But it's an idea that's worked. Now that force is rising, airports in India are increasing, and this is a paramilitary force with a business model. It's an idea that worked. It is not necessarily this government's idea. In fact, the gentleman who was heading the force when we did this story is now the DG of UP Police. So we are on the other side of him very often because of the way policing is done in UP. So good things also should be acknowledged. And I can tell you, genuine good news stories are read a hell of a lot.
Okay, now, unfortunately, there are so many questions that, if you're going to be very brief. Yeah, because I just want to be fair to the audience as well.
See, the role of the media is to report on what's happening. And since government is a major part of our lives, report on government. Now the question is that one part of it is to report what the government says or does. The other part, which is perhaps even more important, is to critically examine what the government says or does by asking questions. And if today a lot of the reporting to you on platforms like The Wire or The Print or anywhere else looks adversarial or anti-government, it's often because there is nobody in government who is even willing to come forward and answer questions or to defend. For example, this child rights issue that I mentioned. Nobody from the Home Ministry is prepared to give an explanation as to how in a state directly run by the Home Ministry, the DGP can submit a report giving this kind of evidence of illegal detention of children. So you run it then without any government comment. And that's sadly the way in which the media, the government's approach to media management then affects the kind of reporting that you see.
Okay, yes, you. And then there was Sarita putting up her hand. Then I have to give it to Nandan because I've done that sort of thing to him before when he's moderating. So, yeah, go ahead. Yes. So all 3 questions and then the answers. I think this is probably going to be the last round. I'm so sorry. This topic really deserves 3 hours, but yeah, go ahead.
I'm Tara Krishnaswamy. I'm a tech professional and one of the active members of the Fifth Estate. So I know you're fixated on Google and Facebook, but the thing is, from the era that we grew up in and prior to that, news consumption was a shared family thing in the sense that either through TV, you see other people, your elders and other people watching TV, or there's papers lying around and magazines lying around, and I'm still one of those few people that subscribes to a newspaper. But increasingly, the young people that I interact with, their consumption of social media is not news. And their use of Google is not for news like it is for me, right? It's Snapchat and WhatsApp and Instagram. So I feel that while you're worried about the Facebook and Google taking away your advertising, your subscription, really the iceberg that you should be worried about is the fact that the next generation isn't even consuming news.
Why don't Indian newsrooms collaborate? Because unless they collaborate, how do you have projects like Panama Papers?
Sarita?
Yeah, Sarita Rai from Bloomberg. So since we're talking about the future of news media, independent media, and sustainability, as a reporter from the trenches, I feel compelled to ask, how sustainable is it for people who work for independent media to make a good, a decent living out of working? Because your sustainability may well be not having people who are experienced or, people who don't need to be paid that well. And, so this is a question that I have.
Thank you. And Nandan, you go last.
No, I think one thing which didn't come through is the disintermediation of the media by social media, right? I mean, today, the followers of Trump, Modi, or AOC run into 50 million people and they just don't need the media. They can just message directly. So isn't that part of the threat that you have?
The powers that be can completely disintermediate you. There
No,
are
I
four
think it's a good
questions,
thing.
so-
For the first time,
I'm just saying I didn't see that being.
Yeah. There wasn't, I mean, there's so many more questions I have here. Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
I think it's a good thing for the simple reason. Once we think of the old media days as some gloriful, beautiful thing. While they did only pure and unadulterated news, and now all these rogues with cameras and things are filing all kinds of stuff. But the fact is, news is now flowing not only from top through the intermediary and the thing, it's going from bottom to up, sideways, everywhere. So our problem is we have to learn to filter at our end. But I think news is finally talking truth to all kinds of power, and that's a good thing. We still have to figure out how to filter out the bad parts of the news. But I think it's a good thing by and large. It has democratized society, even though it has also lumpenized at one end. So we've got to figure out how to sort the two things out.
We're in a transition phase. Go ahead. Answer the other questions as well, please.
No, I think it's an interesting contradiction, right, or a contrast. So at one level, the government, whether this one and people within the government, are very upset with organizations, maybe like ours or others, for the kind of stories we write or the positions we take. At the same time, you have exactly this position. So you have people with large social media followings, then in which case they shouldn't be bothered. Right? So, I mean, you've got your followers, and they run into hundreds of millions, and we are only, I mean, I don't even want to say the numbers, and it's very small in contrast. But, and that's actually the beauty and the power of what we're doing here.
I'll quickly respond to all the questions. Collaboration across newsrooms. We have a marvelous example in the story that Sunil Rajshekar mentioned, the allegation of sexual harassment against the Chief Justice. That story was only possible in a very narrow time frame because The Wire, Caravan, and Scroll collaborated actively. So there were 12 witnesses to be spoken to, or people's quotes to be gathered in 24 hours. Our biggest fear was that the minute word leaks out that we're doing this story, some kind of injunction will be slapped, which will prevent the story from being published. And so that I think that was a great model of collaborative work. I think we worked with Caravan to a certain extent for them following up the Justice Loya story. Others did so too. So there are some examples, but there are also major obstacles of the kind Shekhar mentioned, which is that this is a very competitive environment where people simply, like, in America, if the New York Times follows a Washington Post story, they will say so, that first broken by the Washington Post. Here, if the Times is picking up something in The Wire, they'll say, this news appeared in a digital platform, right? So this is the sad fact. On your question about standard of living, to put it very bluntly, we had dreams when we started The Wire that this is going to be a journalist-run thing, and we will try to pay the best that's possible. And very quickly, the financial realities kicked in, and we can't do that, and we are not able to do that. I still hope in the future that we will eventually be in that position. So many people who work for us and who write for us do so because they know that they are willing to work for less than their market value because they realize that this kind of work requires inputs of all sorts. And so we continue to crave their indulgence, and they do humor us. But this is an issue because the fact is that young people entering the profession. Sorry. Yeah, exactly. And Nandan, the disintermediation, I don't think it matters really because leaders talk directly, and this is their alibi for not, in the case of some people that we know, not giving press conferences because they say, well, I'm communicating.
That's right.
But I don't think that has led to readers at large turning away from the media for news, and this comes to your question, ma'am. I'm not skeptical about the younger generation. In fact, I find that they are very focused on the news that they read or consume. They use, incidentally, Instagram or even Snapchat. We have had great success, both with The Wire and with Livewire, which is the younger sort of readers portal that we've started, in distributing our content through Instagram. We haven't figured out how to make money from Instagram, but engagement is phenomenal. People read, people share, and they read and share the serious stuff, which is great.
Okay, thank you. Now we're really running out of time. Everybody gets a last comment, and then we have to close. So who wants to go next? Last comment.
Last comment, can I respond to one or two questions?
Anything, that's your choice.
To Nandan's point that, they are talking to each other and news. I think for us, for everybody here, it's like you step back from news and you interpret that news. I read somewhere, I wasn't around when NYT was running its like full force in the 60s, but I read in a research report that even NYT has now become more interpretive, and they go beyond news. So, people like us will survive because we go beyond news. To your question on Google and Facebook, I think we have threat not just from Google and Facebook, this duopoly, but all big tech will be a contender for ad revenue. You have Amazon, you have Microsoft will make $4 billion this financial year. You have Apple getting into this. So ad revenue is not just Facebook and Google. To your question on standard of living and to get the market salary, we are very small niche. We do pay market salary, and one reason we are able to do that because, as we discussed, that we have a business model. But there is a crisis of productivity versus number of years of experience that you have. Do you fit in a system? How productive you are? So those are very sort of, at one level, very crass questions. But when you are a startup, you have to ask those questions.
Okay, guys, I'm really sorry. You have to make it brief.
Quick point to Nandan's thing. I think disintermediation is good. Just like in banking, I think the costs of lending and borrowing have crashed dramatically. Similarly, in news, today you now have 1 million types of news. Some may be good, bad, ugly, but the cost of news generation and dissemination has fallen dramatically, and overall it's improved the quantity of content. We still have to sort out the mess. As far as these salaries, I think Alvin Toffler said about, there is the prosumer who is now emerged. Is both a producer and a consumer of the same product. Now, just like a blog, you have the writer and the reader and all the same. So I think there's a huge non-commercial market for news and generation and consumption, and that is driving a lot of things, but we still have to figure out a business model for them.
So we are in an era of manufactured truth. One of the biggest challenges we are and will face is misinformation. And I think, though we've not discussed it today, I think that is one of the biggest challenges that affects everyone, including individuals, brands, products, services, because people will just not believe the message that is given to you, whether it comes on a media platform or it comes through social media. So that is something which is almost like a disease that we have to address. And if we don't do that, and I think a lot of work that we put in as journalists or otherwise will be infructuous. And I think, not to end on a sour note, but I think this is one of the big challenges going forward.
Well, first of all, Sarita's question. Sarita, at least at the print, we believe, and I've always believed, that journalists must be treated with respect as professionals. I am very old-fashioned. I do not believe in the idea of citizen journalist. It's okay, democratization, everybody says something. But there is no, a citizen journalist is an abomination. When you start going to citizen doctors and citizen lawyers, then then give me citizen journalists. Journalism is a profession. Journalism is a profession that needs training, experience. You have to see what looks good, what doesn't look good, what smells good, what doesn't smell good. You should be able to tell a reporter where to go to look for other facts. It's a profession for which people need to be trained. And if you have trained people, they have to be respected, they have to live well. At least they have to live well within their own environment. They don't have to live well like fund managers, right? But they have to live well like fellow journalists. So I think our challenge lies here. Otherwise, we'll just have our camp followers working for us for commitment. We don't want that. We want professional journalists. I'm quite happy if most people working for me have a disagreement with me on my views. In fact, many of them do. I'd say most of them do, and they talk about this. And we have arguments also, and there are no consequences. So I don't want to run, I don't want media organizations now to start running cults, where everybody works for you because they love you and they believe in you, and they'll fight dying. No. So I think challenge for us, we are pioneers in many ways. We've been very successful. We've been around many decades, in my case, more than 4 decades. So we've learned something, we have some goodwill, we have a network, we have ideas. I think we owe it to Indian journalism now to create sustainable models. Having said that, it is not easy. Ma'am, your point on young people, I think we judge young people too easily. We judge young people on the basis of whether they are behaving like us or not. Now, I go and speak at many educational institutions. I almost, whenever I get a chance, various parts of the country, I go and speak at educational institutions. I get halls much more full than these and much bigger halls. And young people are curious, they have strong views, and I can also tell you, if you find that they are bored a little bit, you have to mention just the name of one of the famous anchors from our Commando comic channels, right? And immediately everybody comes to life and they laugh. And so they are not also easily, they are also not easily buying propaganda. It is just that they get their information. They are much smarter than us. Don't make the mistake, please. Nobody make the mistake of thinking young people are dumb. They are not dumb. They are coming after us. I mean, this city is full of young people who are much smarter than India's oldest entrepreneurs. So never make that mistake.
Thank you. And Anya, last word to you. Yeah, I think he's...
Okay, a few things. I think some of the studies on young people in news find that even if they don't sit down and, read the newspaper or news sites, they actually absorb and get it in a sort of ambient way. So I also wouldn't give up on young people. On the sort of thing about negative coverage, there have been various experiments in the US of having less sensationalistic crime coverage, haven't actually gotten the eyeballs, but some foundations are funding solutions journalism, which is not sort of rah-rah cheerleader stuff, but actually going in and talking about solutions that have worked around the world. And those articles are terrific and worth reading, and I think that Mira Kay does some of that in the work that she does. To be slightly depressing and follow up on what Govind was saying, it's not, I agree with you, and it's not just that people aren't trusting the good stuff, it's that they're believing the bad stuff. And I think that is really a big, big problem, right? So the studies on trust in Europe find that all these people that don't trust the broadsheets do trust the tabloids, and they really think that they represent them. So I think that's part of the trust problem.
Thank you. This is such an important subject. I really wish we could go on, but we can't. I will just end with a quote from Joseph Pulitzer. The power to mold the future of the Republic will be in the hands of journalists of the future generation and in the hands of this generation. Thank you all for what you do. Thank you to the audience for supporting the press. Thank you very much to IPSMF. I hope your future will be very, very, very bright.